I am speaking to you from the cabinet room at 10 Downing Street. This country is at war with Germany.
A queen who grew up in war. She was the hope of the British people in their despair. She represented not only a country and an empire, but a century of human history.
You ask what is our policy? I will say it is to wage war by sea, land and air. You ask what is our aim? I can answer in one word. Victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be.
200 years have wrought an immense transformation in the civilization of the world. But I think we may take pride and comfort from one thing. Throughout the vast changes that the centuries have seen, the universities of the free world grow and flourish as never before.
The armed forces of Hitler's Germany swept without check across Europe in September 1939. With their Soviet ally, the heart of Poland was ravaged. Warsaw surrendered to German troops. 9 days later, the whole country gave up its resistance, and Poland was conquered. In 1940, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Luxembourg and Belgium were captured. Then, he eyes a place just 20 miles off the coast of mainland Europe, one he was about to pay dearly for, England. It was the largest war in human history, but the British people were united as never before. Bolstering this unity was a firm role model, the royal family. During the Second World War, the King and Queen became symbols of the fight against fascism. Shortly after the declaration of war, the Queen's Book of the Red Cross was conceived. 50 authors and artists contributed to the book, fronted by Cecil Beaton's portrait of the Queen and sold in aid of the Red Cross. With the outbreak of war in 1939, the Queen was advised by the cabinet that she and her daughters should evacuate to North America or Canada. To this, the Queen made her famous reply: "The children won't go without me. I won't leave the King, and the King will never leave." Although much of Britain was free of German air attacks and bombing raids from the 3rd of September 1939 until the official start of the Battle of Britain on the 10th of July 1940, occasional incidents across the country made people aware that a war was in progress and that nowhere was free of danger.
I am speaking to you in the cabinet room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
Bomb shelters were being built, pilots were being trained, and children were evacuated to relative safety areas. In just 1 week, nearly 1.5 million children were moved. It was a deep and emotional shock for some children. Queen Elizabeth reassured these children as a mother. A giant of the century rose from the earth of England, the most famous Prime Minister of all time, Winston Churchill.
I would say to the House, as I said to those who have joined the government, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. We have before us many, many long months of struggle. You ask what is our policy? I will say it is to wage war by sea, land, and air, with all our might, with all the strength that God can give us, to wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark and lamentable catalogue of human crime. That is our policy. You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word: victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be.
When Chamberlain had gone, Winston Churchill replaced him on the 10th of May 1940. It also meant that the war had reached a fever pitch. The German Luftwaffe dropped thousands of bombs on London. Almost 30,000 people were killed. More than 70,000 buildings were utterly demolished, and another 1.7 million were damaged.
20th of September 1940. Dear Mother, Dad and Audrey, well, how would you feel if you came back home and then there was no home left? That's how I feel at the moment. I suddenly saw the whole thing in ruins and thought, my God, what am I going to do now? I felt incredibly depressed as I walked through the deserted and debris-ridden halls which so lately had teemed with life. I visited the ruined operating theatre where only 1 short week ago I had done my last operation. The nurse who assisted me at it was killed by one of the bombs.
Where were you when the bomb came
Well, in
down?
bed. Where do you think I was?
And
What happened?
and what happened to you?
Well, it blew me out.
It blew you out of bed?
It must have blew me out.
Oh, well,
I don't remember no
did
more.
You managed to get out
Out?
of the house all right?
Yes.
Has it hurt you at all? Do you feel any effects of it?
No, only a bit shook.
You
But
feel
I had to
shook?
find my own way out, and I was trapped every time and wherever I went.
And how do you feel now?
Bar a bit being shaken, I feel all right.
Yes.
Fine.
That's good. The statement made by Mrs. Jiggins is typical of the people in this locality and all over the country. The morale of the people here are wonderful.
Well, I can tell you something. One of the air raid wardens said to me when I stood over there in my night dress, and no shoes on my feet. He said to me, he said, come along, Mother. He said, I'll take you down to the town hall. And I said, what? I said, I don't think it matters, boy. I said, it's my home and I'm going to stick it. He said, that's the spirit, that's what I like to hear.
Elizabeth visited troops, hospitals, factories, and parts of Britain targeted by the German Luftwaffe, particularly the East End near London's docks.
Our shelter was underneath Hubbock's, the paint factory, which is along the shores of the River Thames. And of course, all paint all overhead, you know, it was the most dangerous place to go, but it was underground, we was at least underground. And we was there for, a couple of years, I think.
We knew they were having a terrible time in the East End, and one heard stories of what was going on, but it didn't seem appropriate or possible to go there. I felt one would have been regarded as a sightseer and getting in the way of something that was very difficult for them that they had to get on with.
Her visits initially provoked hostility. Rubbish was thrown at her, and the crowds jeered, partly because she wore expensive clothes that served to alienate her from people suffering the deprivations of war. She explained that if the public came to see her, they would wear their best clothes, so she should reciprocate in kind. Norman Hartnell dressed her in gentle colours and avoided black to represent the rainbow of hope. On the 10th of September 1940, Buckingham Palace was damaged by German bombs. That's exactly where the King and Queen were. After 3 days, more severe damage was caused by 2 bombs which destroyed the royal chapel. The royal couple were in a small sitting room, about 80 yards from where the bomb exploded. And again, Her Majesty did not choose to run away. Queen Elizabeth and her royal family decided to stand with their people and share this suffering. The German Führer despised the teenage royal Princess Elizabeth and her mother, as they helped keep British hopes alive during the conflict.
Thousands of you in this country have had to leave your homes and be separated from your fathers and mothers. My sister Margaret Rose and I feel so much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those we love most of all. I want, on behalf of all the children at home, to send you our love and best wishes, to you and to your kind hosts as well. My sister is by my side, and we are both going to say good night to you. Come on, Margaret. Good night, children. Good night, and good luck to you all.
He even referred to the Queen Mother as the most dangerous woman in Europe, as he watched her and King George VI remain in Buckingham Palace, despite bombs raining down on London. During the Blitz, the King and Queen visited bombed areas to see the damage caused by enemy air raids. On these visits, the Queen took a keen interest in what was being done to help people who had lost their homes.
We'd been hit by a landmine, and the whole of the house down that road had been knocked down to the ground, just like a pack of cards. And I can remember standing on this rubble that was our home. My mother didn't know what to do. She bundled us all in a pram, and she literally walked the streets looking for somewhere to live. She met this woman. She said, well, I do know this house next door to me. They've just done a moonlight flare. There's no windows or doors on it, but it'd be somewhere for you and the kids to stay. As long as you paid that rent, then it was all right. Well, my dad came home on leave with a friend, and they found some wood and they boarded the windows up and found an old door that never ever fitted. And we lived there for over 30 years and we still had that front door on.
After Buckingham Palace was bombed, she said, "I am glad we have been bombed. It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." War was no stranger to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Elizabeth Angela Marguerite Bowes-Lyon was born on the 4th of August 1900. She had just turned 14 years old at the start of World War I in 1914.
To the clarion call to arms, the country eagerly responded. Everywhere the nation's manhood flocked to the army in answer to Kitchener's demand for 100,000 recruits. Prominent figures in all walks of life followed the example of George Robey and made stirring appeals for more and yet more men.
Lady Elizabeth was determined to play her part in the First World War at her Scottish childhood home. Glamis Castle was turned into a convalescent home for wounded soldiers in Angus. Although Lady Elizabeth was too young to work as a nurse, she did assist with welfare work with the patients. She did not want the furniture moved too much because she wanted the men to feel at home. She got their tobacco from the local shops, wrote letters for them to their loved ones, played high-spirited games of cards. Her elder brother, Fergus, an officer in the Black Watch Regiment, was killed in action at the Battle of Lens in 1915. This broke her mother, Lady Strathmore's heart, but made Lady Elizabeth decide to take on greater responsibility. As well as caring for the troops, Lady Elizabeth also played a significant part in rescuing the castle's contents during a severe fire on the 16th of September 1916. 2 soldiers discovered a fire in a room under the castle roof. As they ran to raise the alarm, the first person they came across was Lady Elizabeth, who kept calm and immediately telephoned both the local and Dundee fire brigades. She then marshalled everyone to fight the fire and organised a chain to bring buckets of water from the river. Later, with the fire raging above them, she organised the removal of the valuables out onto the lawn. One of the soldiers she treated wrote in her autograph book that she should be hung, drawn and quartered, hung in diamonds, drawn in a coach, and quartered in the best house in the land. She fulfilled her mother's maxim that duty is the rent you pay for life.
After having inspired the armies under his command abroad to fight victoriously in Libya, Tunisia, Sicily, General Montgomery makes a visit to various war factories to stimulate those at home.
Why is it that today the tide has turned and we are beating the Germans and coming towards the final climax of the war? I'll tell you why it is. It's because we've got far the best equipment and we've got far the best men. And women too. Far the best. I can tell you that our British equipment is far superior to the equipment of the enemy, because I've seen both. I know ours and I've seen the enemy's, and it's very, very good. Now, the great thing when you go fighting, of course my business, as you know, is fighting. Fighting the Germans. Oh, anybody else too who wants to have a fight. The only uncertain thing now is when the war is going to end. When? Well, you can choose your own date and put the money on. I got some money on. I won't tell you my date. But there's no shadow of doubt, that this war is going to end in the only proper way, and in none other. The battlefront and the home front really get down to it. This year we can get the thing almost finished. We can get it so tight that next year we just topple it over. And the home front, I would say, very delighted. We know each other. Between us, we can do anything and will. We will do anything.
In the early hours of the 7th of May of 1945, representatives from the Allied High Command accepted the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany.
Yesterday morning at 2:41 a.m. at General Eisenhower's headquarters, General Jodl, the representative of the German High Command, and of Grand Admiral Dönitz, the designated head of the German state, signed the act of unconditional surrender of all German land, sea, and air forces in Europe to the Allied expeditionary forces and simultaneously to the Soviet High Command. Hostilities will end officially at 1 minute after midnight tonight, Tuesday, the 8th of May. We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing. Today is Victory in Europe Day. Tomorrow will also be Victory in Europe Day. She has inflicted upon Great Britain, the United States and other countries, and her detestable cruelties call for justice and retribution. We must now devote all our strength and resources to the completion of our tasks, both at home and abroad. Advance, Britannia! Long live the cause of freedom! God save the King.
So, Nick, what are you going to do when you get off on leave tomorrow?
I'm going straight up north, see my son, get him christened, and you're going to be his godfather.
Well, we better hurry up with it and drink up quickly.
I guess you're right.
Daddy's coming home, darling. We're terribly proud of him, aren't we? I can hardly wait for my husband to come home. We've had so many messages and congratulations, so many telegrams. Everyone's been most kind to us. Here's a very amusing one. Heartiest congratulations. Delighted to see your ugly mug on all front pages. Such a good reason.
People celebrated their VE Day. In the 1945 British general election, Churchill's Conservative Party was soundedly defeated by the Labour Party of Clement Attlee.
I am now nearing the end of my journey. I hope I still have some services to render.
1945, with war's end, the British Labour Party, committed to a liberal immigration policy in Palestine, was swept into power, and a new cabinet was formed, headed by the sincere and progressive Clement Attlee.
Queen Elizabeth's political views were rarely disclosed, but a letter she wrote in 1947 described Attlee's high hopes of a socialist heaven on earth as fading, and presumably described those who voted for him as poor people, so many half-educated and bemused. I do love them. Woodrow Wyatt thought her much more pro-conservative than other members of the royal family, but she later told him, "I like the dear old Labour Party." She also told the Duchess of Grafton, "I love communists." During the 1947 royal tour of South Africa, Queen Elizabeth's serene public behaviour was broken by an interesting misconception. As the royal procession wound through 20,000 cheering tribesmen, a giant Zulu warrior burst from the crowd and sprinted straight for the royal car. As he shrugged off bodyguards, he reached into the Daimler with a closed fist, only to be beaten back by Queen Elizabeth, who broke her parasol in two on his head. When the stunned man was picked up off the road, officials found he was no terrorist, but had a 10-shilling note clutched in his hand, a 21st birthday present for Princess Elizabeth. The pleasure of the post-war royal journey did not last long. Some royal tours and events were postponed or adapted because of the King's declining health. In summer 1951, Elizabeth and her daughters fulfilled the King's public engagements in his place. A year later, the royal household was struck by disaster. In 1952, at just 52, the Queen Mother was widowed. Bertie, her dearest companion, the king, died suddenly of a stroke.
His mother, his widow, and his daughter. 3 queens watch as the cortege nears the doors of Westminster. Not long ago, great fanfare sounded when last George VI entered to open his new House of Commons. Within today, Lords and Commons wait in silence. And in the Great Hall, a guard watches over the sleeping king.
This was a time of great difficulty. Not only had the Queen lost her husband, but her role too. Her daughter, Princess Elizabeth, took her rightful place on the throne. Although supportive of her daughter, the Queen Mother withdrew from the public eye. It was decided that she should move to Clarence House so the new monarch and her consort could take their place at the palace. Being a widow was not pleasant for her. She consoled herself by purchasing a dilapidated manor on the Scottish west coast, which she intended to use as her retirement home after renovation. She wore black for an entire year after her husband's death. That summer, it took the cajoling words of Prime Minister Winston Churchill to convince her that she could not exist in a permanent state of mourning, and young Queen Elizabeth II needed support from her. So she broke her retirement and resumed her public duties. Eventually, she became as busy as the time she had been queen. In July 1953, she undertook her first overseas visit since the funeral, when she visited the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland with Princess Margaret.
Meanwhile, from southern Rhodesia, films of the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret, arriving for a centenary service in memory of Cecil Rhodes, empire builder. With the press of the world making more than passing note of Princess Margaret's romantic interests, much copy is devoted to this African trip. For the young princess, it's another official duty in distant southern Rhodesia.
During her daughter's extensive tour of the Commonwealth over 1953 to 54, the Queen Mother acted as Councillor of State and looked after her grandchildren. She completed over 40 official visits abroad.
The Library of Congress in Washington receives a notable visitor. Queen Mother Elizabeth pauses to chat with a youthful admirer before inspecting some of the sacred documents of the American democracy. Mrs. Eisenhower is at her side as she sees on display a letter written by Queen Victoria to the widowed Mrs. Lincoln. The Queen Mother has been a 2-day White House guest, and here later she is saying goodbye to the Eisenhowers before moving to the British Embassy for the remainder of her visit here. They part with the warmth of longtime friends. Soon Canada will receive the royal visitor.
Her Majesty was patron or president of some 350 organisations. She was Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Air Force Women's Services and for women in the Royal Navy, and held other service appointments. For many years, she was the President of the British Red Cross Society and was Commander-in-Chief of the Nursing Division of the St. John Ambulance Brigade. She was also Colonel-in-Chief or Honorary Colonel of many UK and overseas regiments, and Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Air Force Central Flying School. There was no official, formal role for the Queen Mother, but she has nonetheless played a significant part in representing her family and country.
200 years have wrought an immense transformation in the civilization of the world. But I think we may take pride and comfort from one thing. Throughout the vast changes that the centuries have seen, the universities of the free world grow and flourish as never before.
She came to Royal Lodge first in 1931, and for a happy few years it was home for her and for her husband. Together they remodelled the house and grounds, which had fallen into disrepair. The war years saw the parkland around dug up for growing vegetables to help the war effort, like gardens all over London. After King George died, Royal Lodge became hers alone. It was central to her life as Queen Mother. The chapel became the most popular place of worship for the royal family, and though the formal announcements would come from Clarence House, her London home, often the heart and centre of her life was at Royal Lodge. For her 90th birthday, the Queen Mother invited the ITN cameras to the gardens of Royal Lodge. It was a marvellous early summer's day. She showed us round with an old friend, Lord Charteris, Provost of Eton, and former private secretary to the present Queen.
It's really a wild garden, you know.
And this is the garden as you planned it?
Well, nature took a great hold, I think, you know.
Now, there are all sorts of stories told about how guests which came to the house were virtually issued with a spade and a lot of charm from you and were told to get on with it.
Kind people did do a little digging and snipping and all that sort of thing. Yes, they were all very helpful. It was great fun to do, you know. It was a bit of a wild place, you might say.
And bonfires?
Masses of bonfires.
Huge.
That's a great joy. I think the king made this garden, you see, really. I mean, he did all the work.
And now we have other friends.
That's right.
Hello.
Oh, ready to do that.
Injuries and illnesses surrounded the Queen Mother's later life.
Only hours later, she braved the freezing weather to visit the Royal Stud on the Sandringham estate, where she fell and fractured her left hip. She was taken to King Edward VII Hospital in London. Well-wishers arrived with flowers this morning after hearing news of the successful hip replacement operation last night, but complications can follow this type of surgery.
The reality is that the Queen Mother will be at risk of having a thrombosis, a blood clot travelling to the lung, and a fatal pulmonary embolism, or even a heart attack. The complications following hip surgery actually account for as many as 1 in 4 deaths.
She's obviously what we would call a biological survivor. She is a brave lady, and she's done extraordinarily well. And she's got a certain tenacity, a certain amount of fight about her, which is one of the factors, I think, which has endeared her to the country's heart.
After her grand centenary birthday celebration in November of the same year, she broke her collarbone in a fall that kept her recuperating at home over Christmas and the New Year.
Hitler called her the most dangerous woman in Europe. It was a tribute to a queen whose visits to a devastated East End did so much to maintain wartime morale. Now, more than half a century later, the bond she established then with ordinary people remains.
During the war, we done what we had to do, patch up the houses and windows and all that. And the Queen used to come down to the East End with her husband, and when you see her, you just, you just come alive again, you know what I mean?
She makes me feel comfortable inside, not on, she makes me feel as if I've known her years and years. She's like a mother. It reminds me of my mother.
Outside the hospital, where the 97-year-old Queen Mother is now recovering, her most devoted admirers have a message for her we can all subscribe to.
Get well soon and be back for your 98th.
On the 1st of August 2001, Elizabeth had a blood transfusion for anemia after suffering from mild heat exhaustion. However, she was well enough to make her traditional appearance outside Clarence House 3 days later to celebrate her 101st birthday.
The Queen Mother joined by her family to celebrate her 101st birthday on the 4th of August. Just 3 days before, she'd had a blood transfusion in hospital after suffering from anemia. As ever, she was determined not to let age diminish her ability to carry out engagements and thrill the crowds. The advancing years, insisting that she could walk unaided to her seat to witness a pageant. Great-grandmother who throughout her long life remained at the heart of the nation's affections.
Her final public engagements included planting a cross at the Field of Remembrance on the 8th of November 2001, a reception at the Guildhall, London, for reforming the 600 Squadron Royal Auxiliary Air Force on the 15th of November, and attending the recommissioning of HMS Ark Royal on the 22nd of November.
She is a wonderful ship, and I hope you'll all be very happy in her. And I would like also to give my very best wishes to the ship's company and to those at Versailles who helped so much. And now, Captain Selson, splice the main brace.
Still making jokes and only occasionally showing any signs of unsteadiness.
In December 2001, aged 101, Elizabeth fractured her pelvis in a fall. Even so, she insisted on standing for the national anthem during the memorial service for her husband on the 6th of February the following year. 3 days later, the Queen Mother was told the news every parent dreads to hear. Her daughter, Princess Margaret, had died. On the 13th of February 2002, Elizabeth fell and cut her arm in the sitting room at Sandringham House. An ambulance and doctor were called, and the wound was dressed. She was still determined to attend Margaret's funeral at St George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, 2 days later on the Friday of that week.
And I think it's very important, in a sense, that she carries through what she wants to do. Because if, for example, she didn't make it to the funeral, and let's be quite clear about this isn't just the funeral of her daughter, this is the 50th anniversary of the funeral of her husband, the late King. This could have quite significant psychological effects on her, and as though she was finally giving up towards the end of what in fact has been a long and successful life.
A final farewell to a princess who was today remembered as a mother, a daughter and a sister. The Queen wiping a tear as Princess Margaret's coffin left Windsor for the crematorium. It was her own wish that even her children, Lord Linley and Lady Sarah Chatto, shouldn't follow. A private family funeral was what she had requested. Prince Charles, who spoke this week of his darling aunt, following as the Princess Royal led the mourners. Hidden behind tinted windows, the Queen Mother came by people carrier. Increasingly frail, she hasn't been seen in public since November.
On the 5th of March of 2002, Elizabeth was present at the luncheon of the annual lawn party of the Eton Beagles and watched the Cheltenham races on television. However, her health began to deteriorate precipitously during her last weeks after retreating to the Royal Lodge for the final time. On the 30th of March of 2002, at 3:15 p.m, Elizabeth died in her sleep at the Royal Lodge, Windsor Great Park, with her surviving daughter, Queen Elizabeth II, at her bedside. She had been suffering from a chest cold for the previous 4 months. At 101 years and 238 days old, she is the second longest-lived royal family member in British history.
Tonight, the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh led 3 generations of the royal family into Windsor's Royal Chapel for a service in memory of the Queen Mother. Her coffin will rest inside the chapel for 3 days before being taken to St James's Palace.
Ever since my beloved mother died over a week ago, I have been deeply moved by the outpouring of affection which has accompanied her death. My family and I always knew what she meant for the people of this country, and the special place she occupied in the hearts of so many here, in the Commonwealth, and in other parts of the world. But the extent of the tribute that huge numbers of you have paid my mother in the last few days has been overwhelming. I have drawn great comfort from so many individual acts of kindness and respect. Over the years, I have met many people who have had to cope with family loss, sometimes in the most tragic of circumstances. So I count myself fortunate that my mother was blessed with a long and happy life. She had an infectious zest for living, and this remained with her until the very end. I know, too, that her faith was always a great strength to her. At the ceremony tomorrow, I hope that sadness will blend with a wider sense of thanksgiving, not just for her life, but for the times in which she lived. A century for this country and the Commonwealth, not without its trials and sorrows, but also one of extraordinary progress, full of examples of courage and service, as well as fun and laughter. This is what my mother would have understood, because it was the warmth and affection of people everywhere which inspired her resolve, dedication, and enthusiasm for life. I thank you for the support you are giving me and my family as we come to terms with her death and the void she has left in our midst. I thank you also from my heart for the love you gave her during her life and the honor you now give her in death. May God bless you all.